Good evening. Let's read some more before it's too late. It's 9 p.m. Just follow my list. I think I need to adjust, maybe need good.
Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal, /Peaceful /Pascal, also UK /SKL, P Latin letter AESKL, school /Carl, Pascal, Cal, US /PSKL /Pascal, French, BLZ Pascal, the 19th of June, 1623 the 19th of August, 1662, was a French mathematician, physicist, inventor, philosopher, and Catholic writer. Pascal was a child prodigy who was educated by his father, a tax collector in Rouen. His earliest mathematical work was on projective geometry. He wrote a significant treatise on the subject of conic sections at the age of 16. He later corresponded with Pierre de Fermat on probability theory, strongly influencing the development of modern economics and social science. In 1642, he started some pioneering work on calculating machines, called Pascal's calculators and later Pascalines, establishing him as one of the first two inventors of the mechanical calculator. Like his contemporary René Descartes, Pascal was also a pioneer in the natural and applied sciences. Pascal wrote in defense of the scientific method and produced several controversial results. He made important contributions to the study of fluids, and clarified the concepts of pressure and vacuum by generalizing the work of Evangelista Torricelli. Following Torricelli and Galileo Galilei, he rebutted the likes of Aristotle and Descartes, who insisted that nature abhors a vacuum in 1647. In 1646, he and his sister Jacqueline identified with the religious movement within Catholicism known by its detractors as Jansenism. Following a religious experience in late 1654, he began writing influential works on philosophy and theology. His two most famous works date from this period, the Lettres Provinciales and the Pensées, the former set in the conflict between Jansenists and Jesuits. The latter contains Pascal's wager, known in the original as the Discourse on the Machine, a fideistic probabilistic argument for why one should believe in God. In that year, he also wrote an important treatise on the arithmetical triangle. Between 1658 and 1659, he wrote on the cycloid and its use in calculating the volume of solids. Early life and education. Pascal's birthplace. Pascal was born in Clermont-Ferrand, which is in France's Orphan region, by the Massif Central. He lost his mother, Antoinette Began, at the age of 3. His father, Etienne Pascal, also an amateur mathematician, was a local judge and member of the noblesse de robe. Pascal had two sisters, the younger Jacqueline and the elder Gilbert. Moved to Paris. In 1631, 5 years after the death of his wife, Etienne Pascal moved with his children to Paris. The newly arrived family soon hired Louise Delfault, a maid who eventually became a key member of the family. Etienne, who never remarried, decided that he alone would educate his children. The young Pascal showed an extraordinary intellectual ability, with an amazing aptitude for mathematics and science. Etienne had tried to keep his son from learning mathematics, but by the age of 12, Pascal had rediscovered, on his own, using charcoal on a tile floor, Euclid's first 32 geometric propositions, and was thus given a copy of Euclid's Elements. Essay on Conics. Particularly of interest to Pascal was a work of Desargues on conic sections. Following Desargues' thinking, the 16-year-old Pascal produced, as a means of proof, a short treatise on what was called the mystic hexagram, Essai pour les coniques, Essay on Conics, and sent it, his first serious work of mathematics, to Perrier-Mersenne in Paris. It is known still today as Pascal's theorem. It states that if a hexagon is inscribed in a circle, or conic, then the three intersection points of opposite sides lie on a line, called the Pascal line. Pascal's work was so precocious that René Descartes was convinced that Pascal's father had written it. When assured by Mersenne that it was, indeed, the product of the son and not the father, Descartes dismissed it with a sniff. I do not find it strange that he has offered demonstrations about conics more appropriate than those of the ancients, adding, but other matters related to this subject can be proposed that would scarcely occur to a 16-year-old child. Leaving Paris. In France at that time offices and positions could be, and were, bought and sold. In 1631, Etienne sold his position as second president of the Corps des Aides for 65,665 livres. The money was invested in a government bond which provided, if not a lavish, then certainly a comfortable income which allowed the Pascal family to move to, and enjoy, Paris. But in 1638 Cardinal Richelieu, desperate for money to carry on the 30 Years' War, defaulted on the government's bonds. Suddenly Etienne Pascal's worth had dropped from nearly 66,000 livres to less than 7,300. Like so many others, Etienne was eventually forced to flee Paris because of his opposition to the fiscal policies of Richelieu, leaving his 3 children in the care of his neighbor Madame Saintot, a great beauty with an infamous past who kept one of the most glittering and intellectual salons in all France. It was only when Jacqueline performed well in a children's play with Richelieu in attendance that Etienne was pardoned. In time, Etienne was back in good graces with the cardinal and in 1639 had been appointed the king's commissioner of taxes in the city of Rouen, a city whose tax records, thanks to uprisings, were in utter chaos. Pascaline. In 1642, in an effort to ease his father's endless, exhausting calculations, and recalculations, of taxes owed and paid, into which work the young Pascal had been recruited, Pascal, not yet 19, constructed a mechanical calculator capable of addition and subtraction, called Pascal's calculator or the Pascaline. Of the 8 Pascalines known to have survived, 4 are held by the Musée des Arts et Métiers in Paris and 1 more by the Zwilling Museum in Dresden, Germany, exhibit 2 of his original mechanical calculators. Although these machines are pioneering forerunners to a further 400 years of development of mechanical methods of calculation, and in a sense to the later field of computer engineering, the calculator failed to be a great commercial success. Partly because it was still quite cumbersome to use in practice, but probably primarily because it was extraordinarily expensive. The Pascaline became little more than a toy, and a status symbol, for the very rich both in France and elsewhere in Europe. Pascal continued to make improvements to his design through the next decade, and he refers to some 50 machines that were built to his design. He built 20 finished machines over the following 10 years. Mathematics. Probability. Pascal's development of probability theory was his most influential contribution to mathematics. Originally applied to gambling, today it is extremely important in economics, especially in actuarial science. John Ross writes, probability theory and the discoveries following it changed the way we regard uncertainty, risk, decision-making, and an individual's and society's ability to influence the course of future events. However, Pascal and Fermat, though doing important early work in probability theory, did not develop the field very far. Christian Huygens, learning of the subject from the correspondence of Pascal and Fermat, wrote the first book on the subject. Later figures who continued the development of the theory include Abraham de Moivre and Pierre-Simon Laplace. In 1654, prompted by his friend the Chevalier de Mere, Pascal corresponded with Pierre de Fermat on the subject of gambling problems, and from that collaboration was born the mathematical theory of probabilities. The specific problem was that of two players who want to finish a game early and, given the current circumstances of the game, want to divide the stakes fairly, based on the chance each has of winning the game from that point. From this discussion, the notion of expected value was introduced. Pascal later, in the Pensées, used a probabilistic argument, Pascal's wager, to justify belief in God and a virtuous life. The work done by Fermat and Pascal into the calculus of probabilities laid important groundwork for Leibniz's formulation of the calculus. Treatise on the arithmetical triangle. Main article, Pascal's triangle. Pascal's Trait du triangle arithmétique, written in 1654 but published posthumously in 1665. Described a convenient tabular presentation for binomial coefficients which he called the arithmetical triangle, but is now called Pascal's triangle. The triangle can also be represented 0 1 2 3 4 5 6 0 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 2 3 4 5 6 2 1 3 6 10 15 3 1 4 10 20 4 1 5 15 5 1 6 6 1. He defined the numbers in the triangle by recursion. Call the number in the m plus 1 th row and n plus 1 th column tmn. Then tmn equals tm1n plus tmn1 for m equals 0, 1, 2, and n equals 0, 1, 2. The boundary conditions are Tm1 equals 0, T1n equals 0 for m equals 1, 2, 3, and n equals 1, 2, 3. The generator T00 equals 1. Pascal concluded with the proof. T sub mn equals the fraction with numerator open paren m plus n close paren times open paren m plus n minus 1 close paren dot 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 open paren m plus 1 close paren and denominator n times open paren n minus 1 close paren dot 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 1 period. In the same treatise, Pascal gave an explicit statement of the principle of mathematical induction. In 1654, he proved Pascal's identity relating the sums of the pth powers of the first n positive integers for p equals 0, 1, 2, k. That same year, Pascal had a religious experience, and mostly gave up work in mathematics. Cycloid. In 1658, Pascal, while suffering from a toothache, began considering several problems concerning the cycloid. His toothache disappeared, and he took this as a heavenly sign to proceed with his research. 8 days later he had completed his essay and, to publicize the results, proposed a contest. Pascal proposed 3 questions relating to the center of gravity, area and volume of the cycloid, with the winner or winners to receive prizes of 20 and 40 Spanish doubloons. Pascal, Gilles de Roberval and Pierre de Carcavie were the judges, and neither of the two submissions, by John Wallis and Antoine de Lalaveria, were judged to be adequate. While the contest was ongoing, Christopher Wren sent Pascal a proposal for a proof of the rectification of the cycloid. Roberval claimed promptly that he had known of the proof for years. Wallis published Wren's proof, crediting Wren in Wallis's Tractus Duo, giving Wren priority for the first published proof. Physics. Pascal contributed to several fields in physics, most notably the fields of fluid mechanics and pressure. In honor of his scientific contributions, the name Pascal has been given to the psi unit of pressure and Pascal's law, an important principle of hydrostatics. He introduced a primitive form of roulette and the roulette wheel in his search for a perpetual motion machine. Fluid dynamics. His work in the fields of hydrodynamics and hydrostatics centered on the principles of hydraulic fluids. His inventions include the hydraulic press, using hydraulic pressure to multiply force, and the syringe. He proved that hydrostatic pressure depends not on the weight of the fluid but on the elevation difference. He demonstrated this principle by attaching a thin tube to a barrel full of water and filling the tube with water up to the level of the third floor of a building. This caused the barrel to leak, in what became known as Pascal's barrel experiment. Vacuum. By 1647, Pascal had learned of Evangelista Torricelli's experimentation with barometers. Having replicated an experiment that involved placing a tube filled with mercury upside down in a bowl of mercury, Pascal questioned what force kept some mercury in the tube and what filled the space above the mercury in the tube. At the time, most scientists including Descartes believed in a plenum, i.e. some invisible matter filled all of space, rather than a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. This was based on the Aristotelian notion that everything in motion was a substance, moved by another substance. Furthermore, light passed through the glass tube, suggesting a substance such as ether rather than vacuum filled the space. Following more experimentation in this vein, in 1647 Pascal produced Expériences nouvelles touchant la vie, new experiments with the vacuum, which detailed basic rules describing to what degree various liquids could be supported by air pressure. It also provided reasons why it was indeed a vacuum above the column of liquid in a barometer tube. This work was followed by Recit de la Grande Expérience de l'équilibre des liqueurs, account of the Great Experiment on Equilibrium in Liquids, published in 1648. First atmospheric pressure versus altitude experiment. The Torricellian vacuum found that air pressure is equal to the weight of 30 inches of mercury. If air has a finite weight, Earth's atmosphere must have a maximum height. Pascal reasoned that if true, air pressure on a high mountain must be less than at a lower altitude. He lived near the Puy de Dôme mountain, 4,790 feet, 1,460 m, tall, but his health was poor so could not climb it. On the 19th of September, 1648, after many months of Pascal's friendly but insistent prodding, Florent Perrier, husband of Pascal's elder sister Gilbert, was finally able to carry out the fact-finding mission vital to Pascal's theory. The account, written by Perrier, reads: "The weather was chancy last Saturday, but, around 5 o'clock that morning, the Puy de Dôme was visible, so I decided to give it a try. Several important people of the city of Clermont had asked me to let them know when I would make the ascent. I was delighted to have them with me in this great work. At 8 o'clock we met in the gardens of the Minim Fathers, which has the lowest elevation in town. First I poured 16 pounds of quicksilver into a vessel, then took several glass tubes, each 4 feet long and hermetically sealed at one end and opened at the other. then placed them in the vessel of quicksilver. I found the quicksilver stood at 26 and 3 plus 2 lines above the quicksilver in the vessel. I repeated the experiment 2 more times while standing in the same spot. They produced the same result each time. I attached one of the tubes to the vessel and marked the height of the quicksilver and asked Father Chaston, one of the Minim brothers, to watch if any changes should occur through the day. Taking the other tube and a portion of the quicksilver, I walked to the top of Puidadome, about 500 fathoms higher than the monastery, where upon experiment, found that the quicksilver reached a height of only 23 and 2 lines. I repeated the experiment 5 times with care, each at different points on the summit, found the same height of quicksilver, in each case. Pascal replicated the experiment in Paris by carrying a barometer up to the top of the bell tower at the church of Saint Jacques de la Boucherie, a height of about 50 meters. The mercury dropped 2 lines. He found with both experiments that an ascent of 7 fathoms lowers the mercury by half a line. Note: Pascal used Paus and Lign for inch and line, and toise for fathom. In a reply to Etienne Noel, who believed in the plenum, Pascal wrote, echoing contemporary notions of science and falsifiability, in order to show that a hypothesis is evident, it does not suffice that all the phenomena follow from it. Instead, if it leads to something contrary to a single one of the phenomena, that suffices to establish its falsity. Blaise Pascal chairs are given to outstanding international scientists to conduct their research in the Ile-de-France region. Adult life, religion, literature, and philosophy. Religious conversion. In the winter of 1646, Pascal's 58-year-old father broke his hip when he slipped and fell on an icy street of Rouen. Given the man's age and the state of medicine in the 17th century, a broken hip could be a very serious condition, perhaps even fatal. Rouen was home to 2 of the finest doctors in France, Deslandes and de la Boutellerie. The elder Pascal would not let anyone other than these men attend him. It was a good choice, for the old man survived and was able to walk again. However, treatment and rehabilitation took 3 months, during which time La Boutellerie and Deslandes had become regular visitors. Both men were followers of Jean Guilibert, proponent of a splinter group from Catholic teaching known as Jansenism. This still fairly small sect was making surprising inroads into the French Catholic community at that time. It espoused rigorous Augustinism. Blaise spoke with the doctors frequently, and after their successful treatment of his father, borrowed from them works by Jansenist authors. In this period, Pascal experienced a sort of first conversion and began to write on theological subjects in the course of the following year. Pascal fell away from this initial religious engagement and experienced a few years of what some biographers have called his worldly period. 1648-54. His father died in 1651 and left his inheritance to Pascal and his sister Jacqueline, for whom Pascal acted as conservator. Jacqueline announced that she would soon become a postulant in the Jansenist convent of Port Royal. Pascal was deeply affected and very sad, not because of her choice, but because of his chronic poor health. He needed her just as she had needed him. Suddenly there was war in the Pascal household. Blaise pleaded with Jacqueline not to leave, but she was adamant. He commanded her to stay, but that didn't work, either. At the heart of this was Blaise's fear of abandonment. If Jacqueline entered Port Royal, she would have to leave her inheritance behind, but nothing would change her mind. By the end of October in 1651, a truce had been reached between brother and sister. In return for a healthy annual stipend, Jacqueline signed over her part of the inheritance to her brother. Gilbert had already been given her inheritance in the form of a dowry. In early January, Jacqueline left for Port Royal. On that day, according to Gilbert concerning her brother, he retired very sadly to his rooms without seeing Jacqueline, who was waiting in the little parlor. In early June, 1653, after what must have seemed like endless badgering from Jacqueline, Pascal formally signed over the whole of his sister's inheritance to Port Royal, which, to him, had begun to smell like a cult. With 2/3 of his father's estate now gone, the 29-year-old Pascal was now consigned to genteel poverty. For a while, Pascal pursued the life of a bachelor. During visits to his sister at Port Royal in 1654, he displayed contempt for affairs of the world but was not drawn to God. Memorial. On the 23rd of November, 1654, between 10:30 and 12:30 at night, Pascal had an intense religious experience and immediately wrote a brief note to himself which began, "Fire. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and the scholars," and concluded by quoting Psalm 119:16, "I will not forget thy word. Amen." He seems to have carefully sewn this document into his coat and always transferred it when he changed clothes. A servant discovered it only by chance after his death. This piece is now known as the Memorial. The story of a carriage accident as having led to the experience described in the Memorial is disputed by some scholars. His belief and religious commitment revitalized, Pascal visited the older of two convents at Port Royal for a 2-week retreat in January, 1655. For the next 4 years, he regularly traveled between Port Royal and Paris. It was at this point immediately after his conversion when he began writing his first major literary work on religion, the Provincial Letters. Literature. In literature, Pascal is regarded as one of the most important authors of the French classical period and is read today as one of the greatest masters of French prose. His use of satire and wit influenced later polemicists. The Provincial Letters. Main article, Lettres Provinciales. Beginning in 1656-57, Pascal published his memorable attack on casuistry, a popular ethical method used by Catholic thinkers in the early modern period, especially the Jesuits, and in particular Antonio Escobar. Pascal denounced casuistry as the mere use of complex reasoning to justify moral laxity and all sorts of sins. The 18-letter series was published between 1656 and 1657 under the pseudonym Louis de Montalte and incensed Louis XIV. The king ordered that the book be shredded and burnt in 1660. In 1661, in the midst of the formulary controversy, the Jansenist school at Port Royal was condemned and closed down. Those involved with the school had to sign a 1656 papal bull condemning the teachings of Jansen as heretical. The final letter from Pascal, in 1657, had defied Alexander VII himself. Even Pope Alexander, while publicly opposing them, nonetheless was persuaded by Pascal's arguments. Aside from their religious influence, the Provincial Letters were popular as a literary work. Pascal's use of humor, mockery, and vicious satire in his arguments made the letters ripe for public consumption, and influenced the prose of later French writers like Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It is in the Provincial Letters that Pascal made his oft-quoted apology for writing a long letter, as he had not had time to write a shorter one. From Letter 16, as translated by Thomas M. Cry, Reverend Fathers, my letters were not wont either to be so prolix, or to follow so closely on one another. Want of time must plead my excuse for both of these faults. The present letter is a very long one, simply because I had no leisure to make it shorter. Charles Perrault wrote of the letters, everything is there. Purity of language, nobility of thought, solidity in reasoning, finesse in raillery, and throughout an agreement not to be found anywhere else. Philosophy. Pascal is arguably best known as a philosopher, considered by some the second greatest French mind behind René Descartes. He was a dualist following Descartes. However, he is also remembered for his opposition to both the